Hello, it's Reija and it's time for another video. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my October reading wrap-up. I hope you will enjoy. I had a pretty decent reading month in October. I read a total of 3 novels and 1 picture book. And I will be talking about the Frankenstein adjacent books first, which I've been buddy reading with Shannon from That's So Poe. And I've been really enjoying buddy reading these books with her. And hopefully in November I will actually be able to finish reading Frankenstein. So without further ado, I will talk about Frankenstein in Baghdad, which is written by Ahmed Saadawi and translated by, let's see, Jonathan Wright. And we started reading this in late August, and then it kind of crept into September, and we just took our sweet time with this. And I actually annotated like a bunch of this, like I wrote some notes and underlined a bunch of things in this book to help me have some talking points with Shannon as we talked about this book on Voxer. And I have to say that I really enjoyed this, but this book is definitely one that needs to be discussed, especially if you are not the target audience for it. This book is very heavily influenced by the locale. So I feel like if you were an actual Iraqi and Baghdad resident, this would, like you would get so much more out of this, or if you had visited or knew the landscape and knew the city. Because I feel like there's so much like sort of inside jokes and sort of like that insider take in this book. So I felt a lot of the time that I was sort of like an outsider looking in, and I had to make my own interpretations of various situations. But I also think that that is a valuable lens also. I am a Finnish person. I have my own lens which through I will interpret things, and that will not be the same as it would be for a person who was Iraqi or Baghdadi and was reading this book. So while I felt like a lot of things went over my head, I still think that I gained a lot of valuable insight into the culture and into the lives that these people led in 2003 when this book is set. This is a sort of satire and a Frankenstein retelling. It takes place in Baghdad, and amid suicide bombings and the US occupation, there is this sort of Frankenstein-like creature that starts to exact revenge on various people who have wronged the civilian population. And it is very interesting. I feel like it takes a lot of shots against various establishment, the government, loan sharks, real estate sharks, and sort of like people who have exploited the war to gain power and to gain money and prestige. So very interesting. I definitely felt inspired to start reading Frankenstein after I read this, because Frankenstein is one of my favorite classics, and that's why we decided with Shannon that we would read more like Frankenstein adjacent books, and we had lots of interesting discussions. If you are someone who kind of, how would I put it? Like, this book is very densely written. It is witty and it is sarcastic, but it is also kind of dense and slow. So the writing style is not for everyone. But I feel like this book really lends itself to discussion. So if you are kind of on the fence about picking this up, I would suggest just buddy reading this with someone and having those in-depth conversations. I had so much more like things to say and things to think about when I was buddy reading this than I probably would have had if I was just reading it by myself. While I enjoyed the book and I enjoyed the satire and the humor and the more grisly aspects, I will say that I wasn't a fan of how the women were portrayed. I wasn't a fan of how the women were portrayed in this book. Ahmed Saadawi's women are basically either saintly mother figures or they are seductresses and temptresses. So there's a definite sort of Madonna whore complex in this book, which I wasn't a huge fan of. So I ended up giving this book 4 stars. Highly enjoyable otherwise, but that kind of the female characters in this book kind of rubbed me the wrong way, so I wasn't able to enjoy myself to the fullest. The next Frankenstein adjacent book that I read was also with Shannon, and that is Mary and Frankenstein, also known as Mary Who Wrote Frankenstein, by Linda Bailey and Julia Sarda. And I really enjoyed this. This was gorgeous to look at. It gives you some insights into Mary Shelley's life, about how she lost her mother in a very young age, and that kind of, like when she was an infant, and that sort of like formulated a lot of her life experiences. She didn't get along well with her stepmother, and like she was also very rebellious. So this talks about a lot of like key points in Mary Shelley's life, and I feel like after reading this I have been very inspired to go and seek out a full biography of Mary Shelley's, because I really want to know more about her and more about her life, and this kind of sparked that interest. And it is also very beautifully illustrated. It definitely has like a very gothic vibe and a sort of forced perspective, which I really enjoyed. I will say that like as a critique, I'm not sure how like a younger audience, which this book is intended to, would like gel with the subject matter. Like, would it go over their heads? But I personally really enjoyed this, and I gave this book 4 stars. Highly enjoyable. I then read All the Bad Apples by Moïra Fowley-Doyle, and I have kind of mixed opinions about this. This book takes place in Ireland in about, I want to say 2012. Yes, 2012, and it also tackles other time periods starting from the like 17 or 1800s, and it talks about like curses and family curses and silencing women. So the main character of this book is a teenager who is a lesbian, and she accidentally comes out to her family and gets basically gets rejected. And then weird things start happening to her, and she finds out about this family curse. And her sister disappears while going to look for a resolution to stop this curse from happening. And the main character then goes to look for her sister because everyone else believes that she has committed suicide. And the main character is like, no, she wouldn't do that. And it sort of takes you on this road trip, on this journey through the history of Ireland, and from the occupation of England, like when England was occupying Ireland and exploiting the Irish people, and through that to the Magdalen houses that were a very unfortunately recent part of Irish history, as well as the abortion law, which was that it was illegal for Irish women to obtain abortions in Ireland, so they had to take the boat to England to obtain legal abortions. And it goes through all of that history. It is very like female-centric, and it goes through all of that very painful history of women in Ireland. And I loved that aspect. I loved the historical aspect, and I loved this exploration of this one family line and how they had dealt and how they had dealt with it, and how that history was a part of this family line. And it talks about curses and the fact that a curse is like a rejection, and when you are being silenced, you then kind of curse yourself in a way. It's like, I can't explain it very well, but there are so many amazing themes in this book, and I find it so frustrating because I wasn't like the biggest fan of the characterization. I enjoyed Moïra Fowley-Doyle's writing style. I basically read this in 2 days. This is a very sort of addictive book. Each chapter kind of ends in a very suspenseful cliffhanger, and then you just want to keep binge reading, and that's what I did. But at the same time, I felt really frustrated about some of the character choices and how some things sort of just came a little too easily for them. I also wasn't a huge fan of the ending resolution, because there is this twist that happens and everyone sort of just ignores what happened and kind of forgives the character in question who did the thing. And I just thought that that wasn't very realistic. I think that that wasn't handled with the same sort of gravitas and poignancy as the rest of the story. And it was kind of sort of a crux moment that was really important for the story, and it just kind of took me out when it wasn't handled with the same kind of care as the rest of the book was written. So I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. I would very much recommend it if you are interested in like female history, queer history, and interested in reading up on Ireland. I found that this was a very exciting book. It just had some flaws that deterred me from giving it like a full 5 stars, but I still would recommend this. And if you can look past some unrealistic aspects and some underdeveloped aspects, I think that you would enjoy this. So 3.5 stars, and I think this is still a very important book, and I still want to read more Moïra Fowley-Doyle in the future. And then the final book that I finished in October was Semiosis by Sue Burke, and I loved it. Full 5 stars. It was amazing. It had some really interesting themes. It is basically about this space colonizing mission where these sort of like very privileged folk had decided to leave Earth and go look for a planet that they could inhabitate and sort of start a new utopia where they would make a new society without the mistakes that Earth had made, which is a very flawed concept in and of itself, because who gets to decide which things are mistakes and which things are important history and important to learn from and stuff? So you have this society like forming in a flawed premise in and of itself, and it looks at the next generations and how they have to deal with the choices that the founding members of the society made, and like it's super interesting, and it deals with sentient plant life, and it basically looks at the sacrifices the people have to make in order to live on this planet and, you know, to survive. And it also looks at humanity and this persistent idea that humans have that they are on the top of the food chain wherever they go, and that this need to almost reach godhood in a way that like to establish something permanent. And when they are then like they come in contact with species that are much older than them and much older than anything they have known, they have to reevaluate those sorts of things. And it's all about like communication, interspecies communication, cross-species communication, and it also talks about the selfishness of this space mission in general, like who gets to go on these missions and who gets left behind on Earth and stuff. It's very, like, I loved it. And the book takes place during like many generations, like over, I think, like about 200-ish years. And it looks at various members of the society through different generations, and how they are building their society and how they are working with the plant life and stuff. And it's just so fascinating. And I also read this in like 2 days, and it was so, like, this book was almost perfectly paced. Like I didn't get bored with it. I didn't feel any sort of like disconnect. I just kept devouring it, and my partner would walk past me and ask like what's going on, and I'm like, the plants are going to war and stuff. It's amazing. Also, I love the onions. If you have read this book, you know what I'm talking about. The onions are like my Patronus now. I love the onions in this book. The onions are great. I can't wait for the next part in this duology. I have it on hold from the library. I can't wait to get to it when it arrives. But yeah, really love this book. It's definitely becoming a new favorite of mine. And there you have it. Those are all of the books that I read during the month of October. If you have read any of these books, tell me in the comments, what did you think about them? Did you enjoy them? Did you completely hate them? I would very much like to know. Or if you're interested in reading any of these books after hearing me talk about them, tell me that also. And I will see you in the next video very soon. Bye bye!